Commander Yonwoo stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching Earth grow larger on the main screen. The blue and green planet looked peaceful from this distance, almost beautiful. His 6 eyes focused on the swirling white clouds that covered parts of the continents below. In all his years of conquest, he had never seen a world quite like this one. The bridge hummed with quiet activity. Dozens of alien crew members worked at their stations, their various forms creating a tapestry of the Galactic Dominion's might. Some had scales that shimmered under the artificial lights. Others had multiple arms that moved with mechanical precision across their control panels. Yonwoo himself was tall and imposing, his exoskeleton a deep purple that marked him as royalty among his people. "Sir," came the voice of Grexmill, his tactical officer. The Vorthak's reptilian features showed the same confidence that filled the bridge. "Long-range scanners are picking up interesting readings from the planet's surface." Yonwoo moved closer to examine the data flowing across the holographic displays. Numbers and symbols danced in the air, painting a picture of the world below. His mandibles clicked together in what his species considered a smile. "What do you see, Grexmill?" "The humans are even more primitive than we thought, Commander. They're still using fossil fuels for most of their energy needs. Their fastest spacecraft barely reach their own moon. Most of their weapons are still projectile-based, throwing chunks of metal at each other." Grexmill's forked tongue flicked out in amusement. "They have over 200 separate nations, and many of them are actively fighting each other as we speak." The bridge crew exchanged glances. Some of the younger officers had never seen a conquest this easy. Usually the Dominion faced unified planetary governments with advanced technology and coordinated defense systems. This was going to be like taking candy from a child. "Any sign of orbital defenses?" Yonwoo asked, though he already knew the answer. "None, sir. They have some satellites, but they're mostly for communication and observation. No weapons platforms, no defensive grids. They can't even detect our ships properly with their primitive sensors." Yonwoo walked to the massive viewport that dominated the front of the bridge. The Sovereign's blade was over 2 kilometers long, bristling with plasma cannons and particle beam arrays. Behind him, 29 other warships maintained perfect formation. Each one carried enough firepower to level a continent. "Display the fleet roster," he commanded. A hologram appeared showing the impressive armada. Dreadnoughts like his own flagship, swift destroyers that could outrun anything the humans had. Carrier ships filled with fighter craft, and massive bombardment vessels designed to break the will of entire worlds. The combined force represented the technological advancement of hundreds of conquered civilizations. "Impressive, isn't it?" Yonwoo said to his crew. 30 ships, 15,000 warriors, and enough firepower to crack this planet's crust if needed. The humans have no idea what's coming. His communications officer, a multi-armed Zentari named Klix, looked up from her station. "Commander, we're receiving thousands of radio transmissions from the planet. Their communications are completely unencrypted. Should we monitor them?" "Put some of their broadcasts on the main speakers," Yonwoo ordered. "Let's hear what these primitives sound like." The bridge filled with the sounds of human voices speaking in dozens of different languages. Music, news reports, and conversations flowed from the speakers. Some crew members laughed at the strange sounds humans made. "They can't even speak the same language," chuckled Vextor, the weapons officer. "How are they supposed to coordinate a defense?" Yonwoo nodded in agreement. In his 3 centuries of military service, he had never encountered a species so divided. The Kelrani had at least managed to unite their 3 continents before the Dominion arrived. The Thasians had a single world government and a respectable space fleet. But these humans seemed to spend more time fighting each other than advancing their civilization. "Pull up the intelligence files on previous human conflicts," Yonwoo ordered. The main screen shifted to show data collected by Dominion spy probes over the past decade. Images of human warfare filled the display. Soldiers in camouflage uniforms, tanks rolling across battlefields, aircraft dropping bombs on cities. It all looked so crude compared to the clean efficiency of Dominion plasma weapons and energy shields. "Look. At this," Grexmill pointed to a recording of a human battle. "They're still using explosive projectiles and kinetic weapons. Some of their soldiers don't even have proper armor. They wrap themselves in cloth and hope for the best. The crew watched footage of human conflicts with growing amusement. Wars fought with bullets and bombs, soldiers running through mud, and Hadebris, civilians fleeing burning cities. It all seemed so chaotic and wasteful compared to the precise, overwhelming force the Dominion employed. "Sir," reported the navigation officer, "we'll reach optimal attack position in 6 standard hours. All weapon systems are charged and ready." Yonwoo returned to his command throne, a massive chair designed to accommodate his alien physiology. The throne was connected directly to the ship's computer systems, allowing him to control the entire fleet with thought alone. He had used this same setup to conquer 17 worlds, each victory adding to his legend within the Dominion. "Excellent. Begin the standard protocol. I want terror, then surrender, then compliance." Just like always. The bridge crew began their preparations, with practiced efficiency. They had done this so many times before that it felt routine. Some worlds tried to negotiate, others attempted to hide their populations, and a few even tried to fight back with whatever weapons they had. But the result was always the same. The Dominion's superior technology and overwhelming force crushed all resistance. "Commander," Clix announced, "I'm detecting something unusual in the human transmissions." "What kind of unusual?" "Their military communications are increasing rapidly. It's almost like they're mobilizing for something, but their sensors shouldn't be able to detect our fleet yet." Yonwoo's confidence didn't waver. "Probably just another one of their petty wars. These humans seem to fight constantly. It will make our job easier if they're already weakened by internal conflict." As the fleet moved closer to Earth, Yonwoo allowed himself to relax. Soon, another primitive world would bow before the might of the Galactic Dominion. The humans would join the thousands of other species that served the Empire, their resources and labor contributing to the Dominion's ever-expanding power. He had no way of knowing that deep beneath Earth's surface, in bunkers and command centers around, the world human military leaders were making preparations that would change everything. The age of humanity's isolation was about to end, but not in the way anyone expected. The plasma cannon of the Sovereign's blade charged with a deep humming sound that vibrated through the ship's hull. Yonwoo watched the energy readings climb on his tactical display as the weapon prepared to fire its first warning shot. This moment always gave him satisfaction, the split second before a primitive world realized just how outmatched they truly were. "Fire," he commanded calmly. A brilliant blue-white beam lanced through space, streaking past Earth's atmosphere like a fallen star. The plasma bolt was designed to be visible from the ground, a spectacular light show that would announce the arrival of the Galactic Dominion. Yonwoo had used this same tactic dozens of times before. The sight of alien weapons carving through their sky usually sent primitive species into immediate panic. "Scanning for communication attempts," reported Clix from her station. "They should be trying to contact us within minutes, begging for mercy." The bridge crew waited in comfortable silence. This was always the easy part, watching a world's leaders scramble to surrender before any real damage was done. Some species were smart enough to give up immediately, others needed a second demonstration. But they all eventually came to the same conclusion when faced with the Dominion's overwhelming power. "Sir," Grexmill's voice suddenly carried a note of confusion. "I'm reading massive energy spikes from the planet's surface." "Panic response?" Yonwoo asked without much interest. "Probably their primitive power grids overloading from fear." "No, sir. These readings are organized, coordinated. It looks like they're powering up military installations across multiple continents simultaneously." Yonwoo's 6 eyes focused on the tactical display. Red dots were appearing all over Earth's surface, each one representing a significant energy signature. There were hundreds of them, scattered across every continent and even under the oceans. "That's impossible," he muttered. "Our intelligence reports showed no unified command structure. They can't coordinate a global response in minutes." "Commander!" The navigation officer's voice was sharp with alarm. "Multiple launch detections from the planet's surface." The main screen shifted to show Earth from high orbit. Bright flashes of light were erupting from points all across the globe. Dozens, then hundreds of objects were lifting off from the planet, trailing fire and smoke as they climbed toward space. Missiles, Grexmill reported, his scaled face showing disbelief. Primitive nuclear warheads, but there are so many of them. They're launching everything they have. Yonwoo stood from his command throne, his confidence shaking for the first time in decades. They're attacking us immediately, without even attempting to communicate. The tactical display became a storm of red markers as wave after wave of human missiles reached for the alien fleet. These weren't sophisticated weapons. They were crude rockets filled with nuclear explosives, the kind of primitive technology the Dominion had abandoned centuries ago. But there were hundreds of them, more than any world had ever thrown at his fleet in an opening attack. "Defensive systems online," Vextor announced. "These primitive weapons can't penetrate our shields, but the sheer number is concerning." The first missiles reached the outer edge of the fleet. Point defense lasers began picking them off one by one, creating brilliant explosions in the void. But for every missile destroyed, 2 more took its place. The humans seemed to have an endless supply of nuclear weapons. "Sir, there's something else," the communications officer called out. "I'm detecting smaller craft launching from the planet." "Lots of them." "Fighter craft?" Yonwoo asked. "Not exactly, sir. They appear to be modified atmospheric fighters. The humans have somehow attached chemical boosters to aircraft that were never designed for spaceflight." The main screen zoomed in to show the approaching swarm of human fighters. They were crude-looking machines, clearly built for fighting in atmosphere rather than the vacuum of space. Rocket boosters had been welded to their hulls, along with what looked like improvised life support systems. "They're flying death traps," Grexmill observed. "Those modifications look like they were done in a hurry. Half of those craft probably won't survive the trip to orbit, but they kept coming anyway." Hundreds of human pilots were strapping themselves into barely functional spacecraft and launching into the void, knowing full well that many of them wouldn't survive the journey. "This makes no sense," Yonwoo said, watching the chaotic swarm approach his fleet. "No species attacks immediately. They always try to negotiate first, or at least assess the threat. These humans are just charging straight at us." The first wave of human fighters reached the destroyer Crimson Talon. The ship's captain activated defensive systems, confident that the primitive craft posed no real threat. The fighters were so small and crude that they barely registered on the ship's sensors. Then the impossible happened. Instead of firing weapons or attempting to retreat, the lead human fighter aimed directly at the destroyer's hull and accelerated. There was no attempt to pull away, no last-second course correction. The pilot flew straight into the massive alien warship with the determination of a guided missile. The impact was tiny compared to the destroyer's mass, but the psychological effect on the alien crew was enormous. The human had deliberately killed himself just to damage their ship. "Did that pilot just—" Yonwoo couldn't finish the sentence. "Confirmed, sir." Grexmill's voice was barely a whisper. "The human pilot made no attempt to escape. It was a deliberate collision." More human fighters were approaching now, and their intentions were clear. Every single pilot was aiming directly at alien ships, preparing to turn themselves into weapons. The radio channels filled with human voices, not screaming in fear, but calling out coordinates and target assignments. "These aren't retreat calls," Clix reported, her multiple arms working frantically at her station. "They're attack orders. The humans are coordinating suicide runs against our entire fleet." Another fighter slammed into the Crimson Talon, followed by 3 more in quick succession. Each impact sent shockwaves through the destroyer's hull. The ship's armor could withstand the attacks, but watching dozens of beings deliberately sacrifice themselves was unlike anything the aliens had ever experienced. 17 more fighters incoming, the tactical officer announced, all on collision courses. "They're not even trying to use weapons, they're just ramming us." Yonwoo watched in growing horror as human after human flew directly into his ships. Some fighters exploded on impact, others simply crumpled against the alien armor. But they kept coming, wave after wave of pilots who seemed to view their own lives as acceptable losses. "What kind of species does this?" he whispered. "What kind of beings commit suicide as their opening move in a battle?" The bridge crew had no answer. In all their years of conquest, they had never encountered anything like this. Species fought back, certainly. Some even fought bravely. But no one had ever responded to first contact by immediately launching every weapon they had while simultaneously sending their pilots on suicide missions. The human attack was chaos incarnate, uncoordinated, wasteful, and tactically insane. But it was also relentless, fearless, and absolutely terrifying to watch. These weren't the actions of a primitive species cowering before superior technology. These were the actions of a species that had already decided they would rather die fighting than live as slaves, and they were just getting started. The explosions outside the Sovereign's blade continued as more human fighters crashed into the alien fleet. Yonwu's hands shook as he activated the ship's intelligence systems, desperate to understand what kind of enemy they were facing. The data streams from Earth's networks had been flowing into their computers for weeks, but no one had bothered to look deeply into human history. Why would they? These were supposed to be primitives. "Computer, display human military history," he commanded, his voice barely steady. The holographic projector hummed to life, and suddenly the bridge was filled with images that made the alien crew step back in shock. The first thing they saw was a black and white photograph of human soldiers standing in a muddy trench, their faces covered in dirt and exhaustion. "This is from something called World War I," Grexmill read from the data stream. "The humans fought this war for 4 years. 4 years, Commander. They lost over 15 million soldiers fighting for strips of land measured in meters." The image shifted to show the aftermath of a gas attack. Human soldiers lay scattered across a battlefield, their primitive gas masks unable to save them from the poison clouds. But in the background, more soldiers were already advancing, stepping over the bodies of their fallen comrades. "They used chemical weapons against their own species," whispered Vextor, his weapon systems forgotten as he stared at the display. "Poison gas that melted their lungs, and they kept fighting anyway." Yonwu felt his stomach turn as more images flashed across the screen. Artillery bombardments that lasted for days, turning entire landscapes into cratered wastelands. Human soldiers charging across open ground into the teeth of machine gun fire, knowing that most of them would die before reaching the enemy lines. "Show me more recent conflicts," he ordered. The display shifted to show footage from World War II. Now, the images were in color, making the horror even more vivid. Entire cities had been reduced to rubble. Humans fighting street by street, building by building, never giving up even when outnumbered and outgunned. "This battle is called Stalingrad," Grexmill reported, his voice growing quieter with each word. "The humans fought for over 5 months. They turned every building into a fortress. When the buildings were destroyed, they fought in the ruins. When the ruins were taken, they fought in the sewers." The footage showed human soldiers crawling through destroyed buildings, using improvised weapons made from scrap metal and explosives. Children who couldn't have been more than 15 years old were carrying rifles and throwing grenades. Old men and women were building barricades in the streets. "They're using civilians as soldiers," Klix observed, her multiple arms trembling as she processed the data. "Their entire population is militarized." "It gets worse," Grexmill said, pulling up more files. "Look at this concept they call total war. When the humans fight, they don't just use their armies. They convert their entire society into a weapon." The screen showed human factories that had been converted to produce weapons instead of civilian goods. Women and elderly humans working in munitions plants, manufacturing bullets and bombs. Children collecting scrap metal to be turned into aircraft and tanks. "They can transform their entire civilization into a military machine within months," Yonwu realized, his confidence crumbling completely. "Every human becomes a soldier. Every factory becomes an armory. Every city becomes a fortress." The display showed more recent conflicts, humans fighting in jungles, deserts, and urban environments. Guerrilla fighters who could disappear into civilian populations and strike without warning. Insurgents who turned everyday objects into weapons and explosives. "Commander, look at this." Grexmill's voice was barely a whisper now. "These humans have been fighting continuously for their entire history. There hasn't been a single year in the past century where humans weren't at war somewhere on their planet." The data was overwhelming. Conflicts in every environment imaginable, frozen mountains, tropical jungles, burning deserts, dense cities. Humans had learned to fight in every possible condition, against every conceivable enemy. They had turned warfare into a science, constantly improving their tactics and weapons. "Show me their modern military doctrine," Yonwoo commanded. What appeared on the screen made his blood freeze. Human military manuals that detailed every aspect of warfare, with terrifying precision, strategies for fighting against superior forces, tactics for urban combat, methods for turning civilian populations into resistance fighters. "They have contingency plans for everything," Grexmill reported. "Invasion by land, sea, air, and space. They've been preparing for wars that haven't even happened yet." The display showed human military exercises where soldiers practiced fighting in scenarios that seemed impossible. Combat in zero gravity, battles in radioactive environments, warfare in underground tunnels and underwater facilities. "This is insane," Vextor muttered. "They're preparing to fight wars in conditions that would kill most species instantly." Yonwoo watched footage of human pilots practicing aerial combat maneuvers that would crush the bones of most aliens. Ground troops training in environmental suits that allowed them to fight in toxic atmospheres. Special forces learning to operate behind enemy lines for months without support. They don't just fight wars, he realized with growing terror. They live for war. Every human is trained from childhood to be a potential combatant. Their entire culture is built around conflict. The screen showed human entertainment, movies, games, and books that glorified warfare and heroic sacrifice. Children playing with toy soldiers and weapons, teenagers competing in combat sports that would be considered torture in most civilized species. "Look at their casualty figures," Grexmill said, his voice breaking. "In their biggest wars, they lost tens of millions of soldiers and kept fighting. They've proven they're willing to sacrifice any number of their own people to achieve victory." The final image that appeared on the screen was perhaps the most terrifying of all. It showed a human city after a nuclear attack. Buildings reduced to shadows, radiation levels that would be lethal for decades. But in the corner of the image, barely visible, was a human figure walking through the destruction, apparently unaffected by conditions that would kill most aliens within minutes. "They've tested nuclear weapons on their own planet," Yonwoo whispered. "They've poisoned their own world to perfect their ability to destroy their enemies." Outside the ship, the human attack continued. More fighters crashed into the alien. Vessels, more missiles exploded against their shields. But now Yonwoo understood what he was really seeing. This wasn't the desperate struggle of a primitive species trying to defend their world. This was a war machine that had been perfected through thousands of years of constant conflict, finally turning its attention to a new enemy. Every human pilot who crashed into their ships was following tactics that had been refined through centuries of warfare. Every missile that struck their fleet was part of a strategy that had been tested in dozens of previous conflicts. The humans weren't panicking. They weren't even surprised. They were simply doing what they had always done, what they had been designed by evolution and culture to do better than any other species in the galaxy. They were waging war. The alarm klaxons throughout the Sovereigns blade were deafening as Yonwoo watched something impossible happening on his tactical display. Strange metallic objects were launching from Earth's surface, not missiles this time, but crude cylindrical pods that looked like they had been welded together in someone's garage. "What are those things?" he demanded, his 6 eyes tracking the trajectory of dozens of these mysterious craft. "They appear to be boarding pods, sir," Grexmill reported, his voice filled with disbelief. "But that's impossible. They're completely unshielded, have no proper propulsion systems, and the life support looks like it was cobbled together from spare parts." The pods moved through space in erratic patterns, some spinning wildly, while others wobbled like drunken insects. Several exploded during their journey, unable to withstand the forces of space travel, but enough survived to reach the alien fleet, and they began attaching themselves to the hulls of the Dominion warships with magnetic clamps and crude docking systems. "Sir, one of those pods just latched onto the Crimson Talon," the communications officer announced. "The destroyer's captain is requesting instructions." "Tell him to activate defensive protocols," Yonwoo ordered. "Whatever's inside those pods can't possibly pose a threat to our security systems." But as he watched the tactical feed from the destroyer, his confidence began to evaporate. A section of the pod opened up, and a figure in a makeshift pressure suit began cutting through the ship's outer hull, with what looked like an industrial welding torch. "That's impossible," Vexter muttered. "Our armor plating is designed to withstand plasma cannons and particle beams. A primitive cutting tool shouldn't even scratch the surface." The human, for it was clearly a human in that crude spacesuit, worked with methodical precision. The welding torch sent showers of sparks into the void as it slowly carved through the alien metal. The process should have taken hours, but somehow the human was making rapid progress. "How is she doing that?" Yonwoo asked, zooming in on the figure. "Computer analysis suggests the human has modified the welding equipment with some kind of chemical enhancement," Grexmill reported. "They've turned a simple construction tool into a military-grade cutting device." The breach was completed within minutes. The human disappeared into the hole she had created, followed by several more figures from the same boarding pod. Emergency lights began flashing on the destroyer as the ship's automated systems detected a hull breach. "Crimson Talon to Fleet Command," came the panicked voice of the destroyer's captain. "We have intruders aboard. I repeat, humans have breached our security." "Impossible," Yonwoo said. "Deploy security teams to contain them. How many humans could fit in one of those tiny pods?" The answer came within minutes, and it was terrifying. The humans hadn't just brought a few soldiers, they had somehow packed dozens of fighters into each pod, cramming them together like cargo. As soon as they were inside the ship, they spread out with military precision, turning the destroyer's own corridors against its crew. "Sir, the humans are using the ship's layout to their advantage," came another report from the Crimson Talon. "They've barricaded themselves in key positions and are picking off our security teams one by one." Yonwoo watched the security feeds in growing horror. The humans moved through the ship like they had been studying its design for years. They knew exactly where to position themselves to control the corridors, which systems to target to disable, the ship's defenses, and how to turn every junction into a deadly trap. The first human he saw clearly on the security feeds was a woman whose name tag read Hyejin. She was clearly a civilian, her pressure suit was homemade, her weapons were improvised, and she moved with the careful precision of someone who had spent years working with industrial equipment. But she fought like a professional soldier. "She's a factory worker," Grexmill reported, accessing the human databases. "According to our intelligence, she assembled electronics in a manufacturing plant. She has no military training whatsoever. But Hyejin moved through the alien corridors like a ghost, using her welding torch to cut through bulkheads and her improvised explosives to disable security systems. Behind her came other humans, mechanics, teachers, office workers, and students. None of them were professional soldiers, but all of them fought with the same terrifying competence. "This doesn't make sense," Yonwoo muttered. "Civilians can't fight like this. Where did they learn these tactics?" The answer came as he watched more security feeds. The humans weren't just fighting, they were adapting. Every time the alien crew tried a new defensive strategy, the humans countered it within minutes. They learned from each encounter, shared information instantly, and modified their tactics in real time. "Sir, we're losing the Crimson Talon," Grexmill reported, his voice barely a whisper. "The humans have taken the bridge and are now in control of the ship's weapons systems." Yonwoo felt his world crumbling around him. A destroyer that had conquered worlds was being captured by a handful of humans with improvised equipment and no formal military training. "How many humans were in that boarding pod?" he asked. 47, sir. 47 humans have taken control of a warship with a crew of over 300. More boarding pods were attaching to other ships in the fleet. The same impossible scenario was playing out across multiple vessels. Humans in makeshift spacesuits were cutting through armor that should have been impenetrable, then fighting their way through ships with nothing but improvised weapons and absolute determination. "Access the human military database," Yonwoo ordered desperately. "Find out how they're doing this." What the computer showed him was the final blow to his sanity. The humans had something called universal conscription. Every adult human received basic military training, but it went deeper than that. Their entire culture was built around conflict resolution through violence. Their entertainment, their sports, their games, everything prepared them for combat. "Look at this," Grexmill said, displaying more data. "Human children play something called war games from the time they can walk. Their teenagers compete in combat sports. Their adults participate in military exercises for fun, but the most terrifying discovery was yet to come. The human database contained detailed information about their weapons of mass destruction, nuclear arsenals capable of destroying their entire planet several times over. They have enough weapons to sterilize their own world, Yonwu said, staring at the numbers in disbelief. Why haven't they used them? Because they've learned to control themselves, Grexmill answered. They've mastered the ultimate military discipline, the ability to possess unlimited destructive power and choose not to use it. The revelation hit Yonwu like a physical blow. These weren't primitive savages throwing themselves at superior technology. These were apex predators who had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare, learning to fight against enemies with superior numbers, better equipment, and strategic advantages. They had turned their entire planet into a military academy, their entire species into a standing army, and their entire civilization into a weapon. And now that weapon had been pointed at his fleet. "Sir," came a weak transmission from another ship. "The humans have taken the Steel Fang. They're using our own weapons against us." Yonwu looked at the tactical display and saw something that broke his spirit completely. The captured destroyer had turned its guns on the rest of the fleet, now crewed by humans who had learned to operate alien technology in a matter of hours. "They're not fighting a war," he whispered. "They're teaching us what war really means." The bridge of the Sovereign's blade fell silent as Yonwu watched his mighty fleet crumble before his eyes. 3 more destroyers had been captured by human boarding parties, their weapons now turned against their former allies. The tactical display showed a nightmare scenario, his own ships firing at each other while swarms of human fighters continued their relentless suicide attacks. "Commander," Grexmill's voice was barely a whisper. "The Iron Spear just sent a distress signal. The humans have taken their engine room and are threatening to overload the reactor." Yonwu stared at the data streaming across his screens. In less than 6 hours, these primitive humans had done something no enemy in 3 centuries of conquest had managed. They had broken the will of the Galactic Dominion fleet. "Sir, what are your orders?" Vextor asked, his weapon systems idle as he waited for commands that would never come. For the first time in his long military career, Commander Yonwu felt something he had never experienced before: complete and total defeat. Not just tactical defeat, but the crushing realization that he had fundamentally misunderstood what kind of enemy they were facing. "Open a fleet-wide channel," he commanded, his voice heavy with resignation. "Channel open, sir." Yonwu took a deep breath and spoke words that would echo through Dominion history forever. "All ships, this is Fleet Commander Yonwu. Immediate withdrawal from the Sol system. All vessels are to break off engagement and retreat beyond the system's edge." The bridge crew stared at him in shock. Grexmill's scaled face showed pure confusion. "Sir, are you ordering a tactical retreat?" "No," Yonwu replied quietly. "I'm ordering an unconditional surrender." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. In the 3,000-year history of the Galactic Dominion, no fleet commander had ever spoken those words. The Dominion didn't retreat. The Dominion didn't negotiate. The Dominion certainly didn't surrender. "Clicks open a communication channel to Earth," Yonwu continued. "All frequencies, maximum power. I want every human government to hear this message." The multi-armed communications officer worked frantically at her station, her confusion evident in every gesture. "Channel open, Commander. You're broadcasting to the entire planet." Yonwu stood from his command throne for the last time. "To the leaders and people of Earth, this is Commander Yonwu of the Galactic Dominion Fleet. We surrender unconditionally. We withdraw all forces from your system immediately. We yield." The human response was swift and brutal. Even as his fleet began to retreat, the humans continued their attacks. More boarding pods launched from Earth, more fighters screamed. Toward his ships, more missiles filled the void with nuclear fire. They fought until the very last alien vessel crossed the edge of the solar system. But instead of returning to Dominion space in shame, Yonwu made another decision that shocked his crew. "Clicks, send another message to Earth. Personal transmission, not military. What should I say, sir? Tell them I request permission to land on their world, not as a conqueror, not as a diplomat, as a student." The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks. Yonwoo traveled alone in a small shuttle, having left his crew to return to Dominion space with news of their defeat. The human authorities had agreed to his request, though he suspected they were more curious than welcoming. His shuttle touched down at a military base in South Korea, where he was met by serious-faced human soldiers who treated him with professional courtesy but obvious wariness. They had every right to be suspicious. He had tried to conquer their world just months earlier. "Commander Yonwoo," said the officer who greeted him, a colonel whose uniform bore the name Min-ho. "Welcome to Earth. I understand you want to learn about human warfare." "I want to understand how you defeated us so completely," Yonwoo replied honestly. "My species has studied warfare for millennia, but you, human, you've turned it into something we've never seen before." 3 months later, Yonwoo found himself sitting in a classroom at the Korean Military Academy, surrounded by young human cadets who couldn't have been more than 20 years old. The irony wasn't lost on him. A 300-year-old alien commander learning military tactics from humans young enough to be children by his species' standards. "Today we're discussing asymmetric warfare," Colonel Min-ho announced to the class. "The art of fighting enemies who have superior numbers, better technology, or strategic advantages." Yonwoo listened intently as the colonel explained tactics that the humans seemed to consider basic knowledge. How to turn civilian infrastructure into military assets. How to make every citizen a potential combatant. How to use an enemy's strength against them. "The key principle," Min-ho continued, "is that there's no such thing as a fair fight. If you're fighting fairly, you're doing it wrong. Your job is to win, not to be sporting about it." A young cadet raised her hand. "Colonel, what if the enemy has better weapons and more soldiers?" "Then you make them irrelevant," Min-ho replied with a smile. "You fight where they're weak, when they're unprepared, and how they don't expect. You turn their advantages into disadvantages." Yonwoo raised his hand, still struggling with the human concept of classroom participation. "Colonel, during our encounter, your people sacrificed themselves without hesitation. How do you train soldiers to accept certain death?" The question silenced the classroom. Min-ho studied the alien commander for a long moment before answering. "We don't train them to die, Commander. We train them to make the other poor bastard die for his country instead." The human students laughed at what was apparently a famous quote. Yonwoo didn't find it funny. He found it terrifying. After class, he walked through the academy grounds, observing human military training. Even the youngest cadets moved with a precision and aggression that would have impressed Dominion Special Forces. But what struck him most was their creativity. They constantly improvised, adapted, and found new ways to use ordinary objects as weapons. In the courtyard, children from a nearby school were playing during their lunch break. Yonwoo watched them divide into teams and begin what they called Capture the Flag. Within minutes, the game had evolved into a complex tactical exercise with flanking maneuvers, diversionary attacks, and coordinated assaults. "They're just playing," he murmured to himself, "but they're learning military tactics without even realizing it." That evening, Yonwoo composed his final report to the Dominion High Command. His hands shook as he typed the words that would change galactic history. "To the Supreme Council of the Galactic Dominion, the species known as humans are not to be engaged under any circumstances. They are not a primitive civilization to be conquered. They are the apex predators of warfare itself. Every human civilian is a potential general. Every human child grows up learning tactics through play. Every human adult carries the genetic memory of 10,000 years of constant warfare. They have turned their entire planet into a military academy and their entire species into a weapon. Do not fight them. Do not negotiate with them. Avoid their space entirely. If necessary, find another galaxy. I am submitting my permanent resignation and will remain on Earth to study their methods. May the Dominion learn from my failure. Former Commander Yonwoo." He never sent another message to the Dominion. Earth had become his home, and humanity had become his teachers in the most terrifying and beautiful art form in the universe. The art of turning everything, including defeat itself, into victory. Years later, when other alien species asked him about the humans, Yonwoo would tell them simply, "They don't fight wars. They are war, given form and consciousness, and an unbreakable will to survive. And, in the playground outside his window, human children continued their eternal games, preparing for conflicts that might never come, but ready for anything that might threaten their world. The End.